Hi, I'm Emily Heffernan, Associate Professor of Biology and Environmental Studies at New College of Florida.
Hi, my name is Wes Kline, and I teach photography and imaging at Ringling College of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida.
In the fall of 2019, Wes and I co-taught a course combining art and ecological practices. This work engaged about 15 students from New College of Florida and the Ringling College of Art and Design. We co-taught this course with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation's grant to New College.
So, in many ways, ecological thinking is connective thinking. We focused on some broad concepts that can be applied to the digital humanities in very specific ways. The concept of observation, that of course crosses the sciences and the humanities and can then be embodied in artistic practice. Creativity in both research strategies and also in the production of art objects and art events. A rigorous research practice, a connection to the digital humanities, thinking about data sets and about how data and can be embodied in an artistic object or in an artistic practice. Connections across scale, systems thinking, and the layering of that data, not just as an illustration of that data set, but as a kind of embodiment of that data set.
So in the course Spatial Ecologies, we really challenged each other and our students to think about how we think about arts and ecology in a greater context in the era that we now call the Anthropocene. And we challenged these ideas through a series of philosophical readings drawing from the strengths of both ecology and contemporary art practice. A big take-home question that we all engaged with was, how can we produce strategies for being with a world that considers itself alone? And we engaged that through a series of assignments, data gathering initiatives, and then final presentations.
So one of the central texts for our course was from the philosopher and theorist Donna Haraway, and her book, Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin with the Cthulhucene. We find this quote: reaching back to generative complex systems approaches by Lovelock and Margulis, Gaia figures the Anthropocene for many contemporary Western thinkers. But an unfurling Gaia is better situated in the Cthulhucene, an ongoing temporality that resists figuration and dating and demands myriad names. This concept of the myriad, the overlapping, and the multiple that resists singularity is really at the core of our course, and what we are suggesting as a core concept for thinking about digital humanities practices in general. This idea of an unfurling Gaia, a Gaia that refuses to be singular, but instead moves as a series of almost tentacles out into the world, and this concept of tentacular thinking as that Gaia, that world space, unfolds out into the world, subjective and objective information and stimuli and data merges together and becomes enmeshed.
So in unpacking the concept of Gaia, we investigated how ecologists think about complex system, how humanists think of complex system, and we developed a series of strategies to engage in our current complex world, and one that we consider as the Cthulhucene, a tentacular, complicated, symphoetic system that bridges space and time. And so in our assignments and activities, we broke down this complexity into smaller elements of nodes connected by vectors, and we looked at these scales in ecology through systems evaluations at the microscopic scale, at the whole body organismal scale, moving on up to a community and ecosystem level. And we used digital tools to investigate each practice along the way. So starting with microscopy and ending in videography. So we gathered data through a variety of means and then evaluated across scale. And we looked for themes, and we used the perspectives of our own research practice in ecology and art to evaluate these systems.
So some of our goals for the course that were enacted in the course were to use data and data layering techniques to think ecologically across multiple scales, temporal scales, spatial scales, agential scales, to investigate forms that facilitate ecological and connective thinking, to explore parallel concepts related to artistic, ecological, and human communities. So students were developing their skills based on these goals in video art production and editing, application of the scientific method to questions of their own design, specimen collection and curation, ecopoetics, and photography.
Additional strategies really challenge students to think about what are the forms that are interesting and help us think in greater ecological and connective ways. And one of the key forms that we kept coming back to were the tentacular, and specifically to tree branching forms. So we see an origin of tree branching in Darwin's original thinking about species and evolutionary descent. We see additional forms of tree branching thinking when we look at neurons and how systems are connected at a very small scale. And then we see other systems of tree thinking and branching as we look at the connectivity between greater disciplines, between transportation networks, between other elements that bind a community. So we often used and referred back to this tree form as a way to help navigate thinking across multiple scales and across multiple entities.
We used examples from a diverse array of artists to show students how these scale and spatial relationships could be enacted and how they could be embodied in an art form as opposed to just illustrated.
Another outcome of our class, Spatial Ecologies, was to integrate data types and assignments into short video works. So our students were gaining skills in digital hands-on initiatives where they were taking video, recording sound, editing, and engaging with questions that were important to them and informed by their own experiences. So a series of assignments drew from community poetry, data acquisition, data layering, and physical mapping. And these projects were used to help students create an inventory of their own interests, and then it informed additional video work that they produced in the course.
Reference distant diagrams, money borrowing property, one plate, excessive blight, equality line, which equality line? We are surveying the receiving weight. Bring legally desirable consideration, eliminate the elixir. A complete and posed ellipse has taken the trees.
So while the course Spatial Ecologies may have concluded, we're really pleased with how the thoughts of ecological conceptual thinking, tentacular thinking has really spread out both in our students, across colleges, and into the community by way of our public art exhibition. Because the concept of tentacular thinking is not one that is unique to just artists or just ecologists, but can be embraced by all of us as we're considering a multi-species future and moving forward together in the Anthropocene.
In closing, another writer who was central to our thinking about this course is the philosopher and critic Timothy Morton. And this is a quote from his essay, The Ecological Thought. He wrote, "If there is enchantment, it lies in the future. The ecological enchants the world, if enchantment means exploring the profound and wonderful openness and intimacy of the mesh. What can we make of the new constellation? What art, literature, music, science, and philosophy are suitable to it?" In this quote, we can see this idea of the subjective enchantment that's brought by the multiplicity of the ecological, and this central concept of being enmeshed in a world and exploring that idea of the mesh and how an individual can connect to other relations that surround that individual, other biomes, other data sets, and how those data sets are interpreted and represented can form a platform for thinking about agency and activity in the world. We can think about this in the context of digital humanities, where the digital becomes another site for enmeshing, a site for layering, a site for taking digital information and transforming it into physical information, for taking physical information and transforming it into digital, and then transforming that into subjective, poetic information. So this transformation of data sets forms the core of how we approach this course pedagogically and can inform how others think about teaching science and art and ecology as a site for being enmeshed.